Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Exchange Café, our monthly conversation. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Exchange Café, our monthly conversation. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Exchange Café. Our monthly conversation with people who are artists and thinkers and writers and musicians. People who are actively and in very original, creative ways doing things that that inform and inspire and echo in different ways what we do with Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is finding and making beauty in the earth's hurt places. We're very happy to have here today Evgenia Emets, and Harriet and she are going to be having a conversation and learning about her extraordinary work with forests and sounds and art all woven together. And to get started, we'd just like to invite you to settle into this hour-long time that we have together in the cafe. And just imagine that you are in a cafe, a place that you go to often, where you know you're going to feel warm and welcome there, where you bring, you have your coffee, your tea, your chocolate, and where you will have interesting conversations, and also where there's always the opportunity to be surprised, to be inspired, to learn something that you had never known before and that answers some question in you that you didn't even know you had until you find it answered. And so we welcome you to this particular time and place. And we start out with Harriet. I will introduce Evgenia.
Yeah, thank you, Trevi, and welcome, Evgenia. Welcome to everybody who's watching. Evgenia, it's so lovely to have you here. It's such a delight to be able to talk to you. And firstly, I'd just like to ask you to introduce yourself, and especially with the cafe, this Earth Exchange Cafe that we have, and this the Radical Joy for Hard Times ethos of finding beauty in wounded places. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with Eternal Forests and where that fits with that, and a little bit about yourself as an artist.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Trevi, and thank you so much, Harriet, for inviting me. And it's really good to be here and to share and to dream together. So my name is Evgenia. I'm an artist. I'm also a poet. I'm a sound artist. Basically, I work across multiple disciplines. Currently, I'm based in Portugal, and I've been living in different places in the world, and I continue working internationally. My passion is earth, ecology, biodiversity, and specifically forest. So my connection to the world of nature, to the natural world, is through this magical world of forest, which I discovered about 5 years ago more consciously as I moved to Portugal and as I've seen the kind of ecological devastation that we are facing here. I launched the project. Well, it is a long story that I'm going to share with you today, but I launched the project 5 years ago that's called Eternal Forest, and that I'm continuing developing. And there are different kind of streams and different rivers that run in and out of this forest, I would say. And yes, I'm super happy to share these different artistic streams with you today. So is it a good time to maybe share a few slides and show you some images, or would we do something before that?
Well, I think we could maybe show some slides and explain really what is an eternal forest, what's it mean, and then I've had a look at the slides so I know what's coming. Maybe explain a little bit about the poetry that's there, the imagery, and explain some of the concepts that you're hoping to develop within Eternal Forests. I think that would be great.
Great, fantastic. So let's then get started. I'm going to share my screen and show you what I prepared. So as I already mentioned before, the project is called Eternal Forest. I'm a very visual artist. I work with calligraphy. So here you see a kind of a logo, calligraphic logo, which is an artwork in its own right, which kind of imitates nature, imitates some kind of branches and strokes in nature. And it's this kind of graphical representation of something that's there, that's growing and constantly changing and shifting. So as I said before, I arrived to Portugal 5 years ago. And basically before that, I lived in London for 10 years in the UK. And I've always been working in multiple disciplines, in interactive art, performance art, sound art, visual art, a lot of exhibitions. And somehow nature always inspired me, but I never could call myself an ecological artist or in this kind of relate to my work in this kind of way. And when I arrived to Portugal, I discovered that there is a huge issue here. We basically have a situation, very briefly to explain to you, a country that is a European country in the European Union that is being basically used in a very colonialist way, where large extensions of eucalyptus trees are being planted, and gradually over the last 70 years, more or less, the forest disappeared basically from the face of this country. This problem also exists in parts of Spain and also in other countries, which I discovered much later. My work with Eternal Forest started in 2017 when Portugal seen some of the most devastating fires. And I basically worked in a specific location 6 months after the fires. This place is called Goiás. It experienced some of most destructive fires. Many people suffered. There was another fire in the same area, in similar area in the same year. And that's how everything started. And my first intervention, very, very intuitive, I never made a film in my life, was to spend 2 months with a specific community, several villages, and piecing kind of interviews together. I made this film called Eternal Forest in 2018. And basically what I did is I started showing the film in different locations and cultural centers and associations, trying to understand, genuinely trying to understand how is it possible that it can even happen, that we disregard the forests, we destroy them, and we live amongst these huge eucalyptus plantations, which are very flammable, very dangerous. They remove water from the land and they degrade the land gradually. So over periods of time, the land becomes really, really poor. The soil becomes very, very poor. So it's a very dangerous place to live. And so then I took that work, I took the film, I made series of artworks, and I started basically going all around the country showing it. And what I discovered is there was a kind of a gap in the whole conversation. Of course, nobody likes plantations. People do it because they want to survive. It's very easy money. It's kind of, you just plant them, they grow 15 years, you harvest them, or you let the company to harvest, and then you basically have your money. And what I discovered was missing is the sacred relationship with nature, is this kind of attitude to the forest as a sacred space, as a place where we would go to have a different kind of experience. And then I realized it's basically disappeared almost everywhere in the Western world, apart from some small places in certain parts of Europe where a kind of pre-Christian tradition is still alive and is still very much present, and where people still even practice it. So it's a living tradition that is like a thin line going through history.
Can you just talk about the writing, that calligraphic writing, those symbols that are on the images in this slide and the one before?
Yes, so as I said before, I work a lot with calligraphy and poetry. So I usually write a poem, and I will read you something today. And this is, for example, a book that I produced. There's 6 copies, and it's made on paper from abandoned paper factory. So it's a vintage paper. This factory, for example, used to supply even British court. So they used to send paper to Britain. It has really beautiful watermark and everything. And I use techniques, calligraphic techniques from Japan and China. I learned these techniques, but I use the languages that I speak. So English, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, and sometimes I also translate my work in other languages. And I work in a way that is quite intuitive. So I write sometimes horizontal, vertical, sometimes right to left, left to right. So I play a lot. Sometimes it's circular as well. And this particular book is all written by hand, and it's also printed with the machine without ink. So you have to see it like against a light. This is Eternal Forest Manifesto, which is a long scroll. It's a 22-meter scroll, and manifesto is basically written as a central kind of artwork of Eternal Forest. It's a long poem that I usually read for the forest beings and for the people together in the forests. I don't really read it like in cities or galleries. It has to be heard inside the forest. So gradually I developed this body of work that brings people into nature, brings people into the forest and creates experiences. And I will share some of these examples later on. And I've been working on developing this concept for eternal forest sanctuary. So what if we had protected forest sanctuaries that are supported by communities where forest is regenerated and protected in perpetuity? And what if artists played a central role in this work? What if art and artists of all kinds, sonic artists, musicians, visual artists, sculptors, installation artists could basically be like activators, actors inside community to be able to create some beauty as the trees are growing and as the forest is being regenerated, and could add a value to this work. Just an example that of work that I did last year with the Natural History Museum here in Lisbon. I basically decided that it's also very good to work in urban environments after working quite a lot in rural places in Portugal, and not only. And I created this work called Council of Seeds. And what happened is a couple of years ago, I heard the calling of the land while I was working on a specific project here in a very, very difficult place in Mertola, very dry place. And the land told me, you must write in my voice. And it was a very, very powerful calling. And it really turned around my whole perspective on how I am as a poet and as an artist. And so I started exploring these possibilities of writing from the perspective of rivers, mountains, forests, rocks, and then seeds. So in this particular case, we have an example of seeds coming to me in Botanical Garden of Lisbon, talking to me, volunteering to speak. So that project is a site-specific installation that I developed over several months. I collected the seeds that were available in this particular moment. And then I created this series of poems and an experience inside Botanical Garden of Lisbon, which anybody can go and with audio guide now listen to. And here in this project, the trees and the seeds speak for themselves, where we combine.
Sorry, how does the process happen for you out on the land? I'm really interested in, you know, what's that communication, and how does the voice of the land, the voice of the trees, the seeds then translate in that moment?
Yeah, so it is still a process. It's not something in the past. I'm developing this sensitivity and ways of collaborating with the land. So every time, for example, I go scouting for an eternal forest, which I will talk later about, I really like to spend some time and listen to the land and listen to the beings of the land and what they can tell me and what they want. What is their dream? What is their vision? What are their needs? And how we as humans can be there for them and do the work together with them rather than like having our own ideas. In this particular case, I did extensive research about botanical knowledge about these particular trees and seeds. I tried as much as I can to do research about indigenous uses. And it was, I have to say, it was very, very hard. There are some indigenous knowledge that we know of and that is more widespread. Like, for example, about ginkgo tree, there is a lot of beautiful books written, and we know a lot from culture of Japan and China. But there are certain types of trees and seeds that I could find almost nothing, just glimpses, kind of some mythological information that I had to piece together. And I think this is a problem. And I would like to see in our lifetime, indigenous voices really coming out and sharing this knowledge, but also making it, making us aware that the way we understand certain trees, certain species, certain plants is very reduced, and it makes us look at them sometimes as just exotic or even invasive, because of course they're taken out of context, etc. So in this project, there is some trees I worked with that are considered invasive in certain countries. And I don't agree with even that term. So for example, here you have ginkgo, which is of course an absolutely incredible plant, medicinal, and I can read you this poem. And the point where we met together, ginkgo and I, actually it's two ginkgo trees, so it's a male and female ginkgo. In the past situation was that botanical gardens and when the tree is being planted in many places, in many cities, it's only the male ginkgo that usually they like to plant, because the female ginkgo drops this fruit that people don't really like the smell, and when it's ripe, so they prefer not to plant the female tree. However, the situation is already changing, and there is much more awareness, because of course ginkgos are one of the most ancient trees. And what ginkgo tree communicated to me is that she wants to be together with the male ginkgo tree. So in the Botanical Garden of Lisbon, we have male and female ginkgo trees, and the whole process is happening, and you have little saplings growing under the female tree. So there is natural regeneration that's going on. Would you like me to read the poem?
Yes, please do.
Okay. It's called The Marriage of Ginkgo. Plant me nearby water, sow me with your ancestors, bury me into the black soil, put me next to my siblings, set me in with a new moon, I shall ascend with her. Spring into spring, I'm your new beginning, fall into fall, I'm your living gold, a good quarter of your life, a treasured spring of my youth. My moon has come around for your precious offspring to savor my willing fruit. My every stem swollen, my every pulse awake, swallow awaited pollen, spiral for life's sake, yet unbeknown to me, swimming my inner sea towards my cherished jewel.
And that poem is so beautiful. It really does encapsulate what you're talking about that beautiful sense of creation and being with their lover. Almost, there's something very romantic about that poem. It's a calling, isn't it? Calling to their lover. And so a little bit further on, you mention the project itself and how that seems to be structured. So moving now into the idea of where humans come in. Could you explain a little bit more about what that is? What's the Council of Seed? What's the Circle of Guardian? What's those things?
It's so funny that you say Council of Seeds and the Circles of Guardians. You mentioned both of them. So this year, as I was working on the Council of Seeds, these are, by the way, images from the performance in the Botanical Garden. It's like an immersive journey that I do. Nobody's allowed to talk, and we go through the garden and we listen to the stories. And the point of doing the Council of Seeds project is bringing seeds into the circle of humans. So my invitation to the people is to receive other beings into the circle that we are, that our society, On the other hand, this year, what became very, very strong and apparent is necessity to be in circles. And that is already reflected in the new work that I'm doing. I'll share a little bit later, where we are in the circle in the workshops and experiences where we listen to the voice of each other and we include the being of the forest, the being of the land into the circle and their voices, which is very, very important.
So I just have one question about that. So do the participants, and I know that the participants are very important in your work, do the participants get a chance to speak about what they hear from the forest as well?
Yes, absolutely. So here what you see is there is an image on the right, I think on the screen with the drawn ginkgo tree. So this is a series of drawings that participants do after the experience. And for example, in another artwork, which is this year later in November. So this was experienced in the forest, for example, and then afterwards they had this experience. They also shared, they were also sharing for 2.5, 3 hours how they're feeling, what are the questions, and also reflections. So there is artistic element where everybody can participate and can basically create this reflections, which then also become part of a larger artwork of Eternal Forest with contributions from everybody else.
That's so fascinating. I'm interested in the way you describe it. It's called the Monsanto Art Project, but you're just saying they share their feelings and their reflections. And I'm also noticing how ritualistic it seems to be. Can you talk a little bit more about where it sits? Is it art? Is it ritual? Is it a therapeutic container? Or is it all of that? And do we have to get rid of the fact that we don't actually need to separate these things?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, because I think in our society, we are still living with these boundaries, very strong boundaries. In contemporary art, ritualistic practice always needs to be contextualized. And if I cross these boundaries, if I go in between these worlds, I need to really patch them together. I need to weave this fabric. I would love to think that this is really good time for us to bring ritual, experience, art performance together in a meaningful way and also in a deep way. I think performance, there are many artists who have done this work before me, where performance becomes ritualistic and deeply meaningful, where the participants are going through some kind of transformation, almost an initiation. And I think it's really important that art steps up and starts talking about these experiences openly. And so the way I talk about my work, there is a little bit of all of that in it. There is initiation, there is ritual present. I call it art experience because I would like to go beyond the boundaries of pure performative practice, although the basis of it is performance. When you mention Circle of Guardians, it's really important because with this project, for example, now in Monsanto Forest Park, which is very, very near Lisbon, it's very accessible place. People can come to this experience, then do the workshops with me. And the idea is maybe they take away the seed of eternal forest with them and perhaps can become guardian of their own forest or something that they can imagine. So for example, 2 ladies came to my performance from Denmark. They're both sonic artists. They're traveling, they're doing Erasmus here, they're composers, and now they want to bring eternal forest to Denmark and do this work there, matching with their own project that is called Room for Rest, which allows people to have this kind of rest in nature, in beautiful places, with silence, with a slowing down, in a facilitated way. So I think in this sense, we're artists, we are becoming kind of guides into that dimension and hopefully creating more and more transformative experiences. So as I'm working with many communities, inspiring them to create physical protected forest sanctuaries, I'm also deciding now to commit my time to creating more experiential work, because I think that only through direct experience, we can open up our hearts and our minds to then be able to, through this transformation, to be able to contribute and to do part of this work.
Yeah, it's very much in keeping with what we do with Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is to go to places that have been hurt and to find and make beauty there. And part of the experience is having people have enough time to go on their own into whatever place we're in. And we call it getting to know the place as it is now, and then bringing back those stories. And it just, as I'm sure you know, that just the expression of the stories themselves deepens the experience, because people are realizing that they learned and received things that they didn't even know they were receiving when they were happening.
Mm. Yes, I like that. And this is exactly what I'm doing. And for example, in this last experience that I developed for people, they receive gifts. They receive various gifts at various stages. I don't want to give out too much, but they basically receive the gift from the forest time, from the ancient forest of the future. They receive the gift from the mother tree. By the way, this experience in Monsanto Forest Park, the first one I created is called Finding the Mother Tree, which is of course inspired by the work of Susan Simard. I started developing this trail in the time when her book was just coming out. So I was expecting that baby to show up in the world, and I already gave the name to the project. I hope she doesn't mind. And in fact, it's because I found that mother tree in this man-made forest, because Monsanto is a man-made forest, for example. So if we go back a few slides, it looks like a proper forest. This is 90-year-old forest that some great minds living in Portugal in this time basically imagined and then created. It was almost a bold mountain with farm fields, the legacy from agricultural time, and they decided, okay, we're going to create something very special here. It's considered now to be green lung of Lisbon. And I'm doing this work with them because for me, it's very important to show to the people what is possible just after 90 years. And what if we could create these local forests everywhere, and then create green corridors, and then create community protection and community engagement? How would our life with the forest change?
That's
And
incredible.
this brings in, it really is, and it brings in what your intention is to really think about this in the deep future.
Yeah.
This isn't just what can we do within my lifetime. This is seeing the very long view and recognizing that wounds take a long time to heal. Yes. So tell us a little bit more about that.
The deep future and the long-term healing. Yes, I mean, so when I first made a proposal for first sanctuary, it was a few years ago for like a local biennale in Portugal, in Coruche. And I made a proposal to make a protection for 100 years. And when I finished that specific project, I thought, no, 100 years is nothing. It's just 1.5 human kind of lifetime, no? So it's really not enough. Forest takes much longer, 500 years, 1,000 years. That's when a good forest ecosystem we can consider to be stable. It's already gone through cycles of deaths and diseases and things coming and going. So the system more or less is established. So then I changed my perspective and I decided, what if I can work with this forest time, which I consider to be 1,000 years roughly, where many human generations can participate. So this approach creates continuity and that vision that puts an anchor into the forest time, which I believe more or less is between human time and deep geological time, because deep geological time is really hard to grasp, is really hard to understand, and it's very hard to work with. However, I do believe that rocks have their own sentience and their own time. But I decided, okay, what if we experienced forest time and how would we then explore it? So my idea was starting to work from that focus, and specifically going with the ideas and the values of biodiversity and how art can serve these values, and how we could create basically legacy for the future and the future generations. So just to kind of go back a little bit to what it is, if we could imagine something like an eternal forest sanctuary, it's basically where large-scale ecological art meets the forest. So is the art that follows perhaps trails and is in the forest, and the forest is protected. And by bringing artists there, we keep planting and renewing things, regenerating soil, water cycles, and community that is living in the proximity of the forest can create a bonding with the forest by going there after cycles and cycles and cycles. And that's where the experiential work comes in. That's where I invite also other artists to come together with me and create different kinds of experiences where we can be with forest in different ways, but not only artists, different kinds of practitioners, people who do forest bathing, people who do eco-psychology, people who do ecotherapy. I'm trying to connect with everybody, and Harriet, you know about it because we had another conversation where I'm really actively going out and searching for practitioners of all kinds to bring, to do this work together. And so, yeah, basically this project is really inviting people to shift from this short-term thinking to the long-term and kind of create really legacy for the future generations.
And very collaborative too, which is so, you know, that's so important.
So this is the first work that I did in during Biennale de Coruche. It was 2020, I believe. And it was just before pandemic started. And from there, the whole thing basically started going. Right now, we have several places that are committed, that are interested. There is always the community element. Without community, I believe this forest cannot be made and cannot be. We can make conservation project, but how do we protect? How do we engage? And how do we know? For me, it's not enough to just say, oh, something is protected. We need to know what are the plants. We need to know the place intimately. We need to know what they say. What are they and why are they there? So the Circle of Guardians idea is basically like a first group of people, of pioneers who say, okay, we're going to make it happen. We are committed. Sometimes I only need 1 or 2 people to get started. And then they would bring their community inside. So they're like first activators. And the Circle of Guardian role is really to keep the vision alive, to bring others, and to activate the space through different experiences and events. And this is what we did when there was pandemic. In Portugal, it was not so difficult where I was living because I live in a village. We were going every week out with these people, and a lot of them are connected with the project. So this is my local Circle of Guardians, and I believe anybody can do it anywhere in the world.
That's really good to see, because I'm sure people will be very keen to know how to get involved, what it actually means, whether, you know, the barriers of things like getting permission to protect a forest, those sort of practical steps. So thanks for doing that. It reminds me of sort of druidic training and practices where we have the 3 strands of devotion, or the three drops of Arwen, the things that inspire us to be connected to nature. And they are knowledge, as you said. It's like knowing the plants, knowing the biodiversity, understanding what it is to actually be in a forest and all the other beings that are there with you. And ritual is so important, and just being in nature, and how those 3 strands, you call them protecting, engaging, and the knowledge of the landscape, they are so important. And I just want to bring you to something that you touched on and then moved away from, which is the manifesto has to be heard inside the forest. You don't repeat it. And that makes me curious about those people that you meet, the collaborations, all the conversations that you have, it's kind of talking and painting a picture of something that could be. How are you finding it in actually bringing people into the forest? What's their experience in your own experience, and how do you find that their immersion, their understanding, their sense of ritual and sacredness in the forest is actually translating into their own projects and their own action?
Thank you. That's a great question, because that one moment or several hours that we spend in the forest, it's everything. Sometimes it's enough to have that direct experience for somebody that it really invites them, or it's like opening of a portal in somebody's life to another possibility. It's like opening some kind of inner space where they find something, a kind of a door that was always there, but they never knew how to walk into that door. Generally, I discover there is, of course, still a lot of fear and also a lot of misunderstanding of like there is a lot of forest walks, there is a lot of nature walks, but what I started noticing is we just go through the forest, like literally through the forest, and I think this is not enough. So we are trying to really slow down and then open all of the senses to be able to perceive. So for example, the practice of deep listening is crucial. It's like a key practice alongside with some guided rituals and guided meditations and contemplative journeys and kind of suggestions that are there. For example, I developed this specific meditation. I didn't develop it, actually. It was given to me by the forest of Bielavesia, which I don't think I have a photo here, but I was last year in Bielavesia forest on the border of Poland and Belarus, ancient forest of Europe, and I was spent there 10 days. And the last day, as I was almost leaving, the forest told me, get your recording device, take your phone and record this. And I just literally recorded, and how it recorded, I put it online. So it's a contemplative practice that takes you 1,000 years forward, and then you're coming back. And the way, the method of this practice is super simple. We just do it on 10 breaths, 1 breath, 100 years. We receive a message either from a specific tree, if we are doing it around the tree, like in the case of Monsanto, around the mother tree, or from the land, so that I can change. But the forest told me, don't change anything else, trust and follow. And that works magic. People come back and then they write reports to me, sharing that every 100 years they literally saw changes in the environment. And these changes were drastic, like they saw people, then no people, then floods, then fires. And I think it's really important for us to experience something like this, because then we're not attached to something like, oh, everything needs to be fixed today, the environment needs to be fixed, and we need to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Nature is going to change, and climate, it's like climate change, it's a 50-50 thing. Yes, there are issues, and yes, we are affecting climate, but on the other hand, climate has been changing on planet Earth. So we must also be a little bit like not so attached that we are the only ones that are making a difference or affecting. Of course, we are creating a lot of anthropogenic negative effect. So people respond very deeply to these experiences, and I am sometimes amazed. To me, it seems like it's just simple what I'm doing. Sometimes because I hold space, I cannot go on the same level with them. I see other things and notice other things. But when they come back and report and write, and now all of these reports are available because I ask them to do it, it's incredible. And then what I see more and more, people want to go back to their own place and say, I think I can do something like this. I can actually take care and protect my own forest and also offer space for others.
Is there a place on your website where people can read about that these 10? Okay, how do they do that? Where is it?
So I would suggest, so here I can also show you some places where I work, but basically eternalforest.earth, we can also send share link later in the comment. There is a Facebook group that is called Eternal Forest, Instagram that is called actually Eternal Forest Global, it's a different name. And on the website, on the Eternal Forest website, they can also sign up because I do many events and sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're online events. So I can definitely, I will definitely reach out once somebody's signed up. And yes, I'm thinking that at some point, probably after next year, I will be doing something like international journeys. So international groups where people who are really willing to do this work and really want to do it with their communities can spend regular time together online, like a council, to learn certain things and to hear from each other how others do it so that they can bring this work to their community. That is the idea.
I think that's a really beautiful idea. And yeah, I think from my own experiences and so many people's experiences with COVID is that when we can connect and do these sort of things on Zoom and then going and finding our own landscapes, our own places, there's such a richness to that and an authenticity, and it really means a lot to individuals that they haven't traveled hundreds of miles to get to know a forest that they're not going to see again for, or maybe not for another 10 years, but to actually ground in the place that they belong to is so powerful. And I can imagine that people would be interested in that. I see you have a few more slides, Evgenia. Shall we see whether we can close that? We've got about 15 minutes left. So
I just want to show a few slides so that people also understand that, like, see where we are more or less and where I would like to work. So these are a lot of these places, like Eternal Forest Sanctuary Saint-Alvert in France. It's a sound artist called Maëlys. This is her private land, but she would like to create a festival on the land and an Eternal Forest Sanctuary potentially. These are some of the places around the world where we are having conversations. The Split Rock Eddy Foundation in the USA, this is quite a realistic project. I'm supposed to go there next year, and in the partnership with a couple of organizations, we'll develop an art trail, which will become eventually an Eternal Forest Sanctuary. Starting to work with Artists for Plants in Choco, Colombia. It's one of the most important biodiversity hotspots in the whole world, constantly in danger of disappearing because they always want to build another port or something like this there. I'm not going out necessarily searching for places. They actually find me, like this one in Denmark, these two girls that would like to bring this project there. So I'm just showing you this slide just for you to kind of have an idea. But this all happened in a very, very organic way by me kind of visiting people and going and seeing the places. Maybe I stop sharing my screen, and I just want to show for those who would like maybe to know more, and if they want something kind of physical, there is a book that I published this year, and it's available through my website, just enough to send me a message. And the book has a lot of information. There is some writing, there is poetry, there is Council of Seeds in this book with all the poems. And yes, so if there is interest, you can write to me, and yes, I can send you a copy of the book. I'm doing a book launch here in Lisbon on the 16th. My dream is to do it one day in London as well, because I consider it also to be my home. So hopefully later this next year, I can also come and launch it in the UK. But yes, the work continues. And what I would like to say also is, for me, everybody brings something of their own. Everybody brings the intimate connection between them and the forest, between them and plants, between them and rocks, and also brings different kinds of methodology and practice and art. So for me, it's really, really important that people start joining in with their own contributions. It's not, I'm just holding space for my lifetime being, but my hope is that future generation, and here we go, will take over. Because, for example, a circle of guardians, I don't think there should be like only elders there. There should be elders and a younger generation, and then really, really young generations. I think the kids should have a place in the circle of guardians with their own voice, and maybe even their own way of being and doing, maybe even their own circle. I don't know. So this is very much how can we really engage different generations. So in this kind of work, there is a continuity.
It's so important. It brings to mind something that we worked with a couple of years ago about baseline creep, where things that our grandparents took for granted, you know, that the cuckoo would be heard in May, you know, that there was a certain amount of tree cover that suddenly disappeared, and that the younger generations just aren't aware of. And we think what is normal now has always been normal. And so, yes, engaging the very young into knowing what's normal for them as children means that they have something to reflect upon and to judge their lived experience when they become adults. And I think that, you know, going back to what you mentioned about how really when you researched and looked at the what was going on with the relationship or lack of relationship, what was really breaking down, and what was really at the crux of it, you said it's the sacred. The sacred has gone, and you can be seen in pockets, you know, pre-Christian pockets or ancient woodland pockets. I think from my personal point of view, sacredness begins very, very young. And we can see that when we see it modeled around us in the community, and when our older, you know, peers help us see that. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, and it makes Harriet refer, we speaking of young people, and I've been finding myself wondering as we've been having this conversation is what you were like as a little girl, you know, like you said, you came to this work through moving to Portugal, and when in a time when there were so many fires, but what was your relationship with the natural world and with art when you were small?
That's a great question. Well, I grew up in Ukraine. I grew up with I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and it was the best time, of course. We spent time between going to the sea and having our garden and growing everything basically that you can imagine, even potatoes. So I spent a lot of time hanging out and playing with the garden and knowing how to grow vegetables. It was much easier than growing here because the earth is black where I'm from. It's very fertile. But what I remember, and I think what affected me a lot, I had like total freedom to be with nature. My grandmother knew herbal medicine. We basically were collecting flowers and herbs to make teas, and my medicine was mint or melissa or chamomile or other things that were growing in the vicinity, and then some more serious herbs that she knew. And of course, now I cannot ask her more because I actually started this project after she passed away. But I do know already from other stories that there is a big legacy of witchcraft in my female line. And even there were some things maybe that were darker, and some things that were then made more transform into light work. No, I think we all have that, and we all experienced and experimented with different things. I feel very strong about claiming a feminine power of knowing your place, knowing your earth, knowing your plants, knowing your spirit world, and really making yourself known to them as well. Like go and introduce yourself. And all of this work also, like all this understanding came a bit later. But I remember when I was a kid going into the fields, I was just hanging out with these plants all the time and with the trees. And for me, it was really important that I have this contact. And some trees, I guess, in my life are also power trees, because I grew under, for example, a shade of walnut trees in Ukraine. playing as a kid. And these trees seemed to be huge, just really, really massive. And we would always harvest the walnuts when they were still green. So I know, for example, now it's very popular, the medicine of the walnut, and you can make lots of things with it. But then, and my grandmother for sure used it from, but we were playing, and it is all in my memory, in my body memory, in my visual memory, in the sonic memory as well, because of course different trees and different forests sound differently. So when I need a reference, a good forest bath, let's say, and rejuvenation, I would totally go to Eastern European and Northern kind of forests, because they are more familiar to me. I understand them, I know the plants. So, and I'm really grateful for that experience of the child.
And maybe perhaps as a final question, you say the circle of guardians has the seeds, the council of seeds, and you encourage a seed to go to a person. Do you feel that there's a seed that came to you? Can you remember a seed if there was one?
Well, there were many. There were many. For example, I mean, there were more metaphorical seeds. There were seeds that came through dreams. The dreams are seeds for me. Like the natural world knows me very, very well. And what they would do, they would communicate to me through my dreams. So they would know that I would perceive the information and the knowledge through the dream. So that's how they speak to me. They know it works. And I'm really grateful that they do it like that. But for example, when I started working on this project Council of Seeds, there is a specific seed and tree. It's called black walnut. And okay, I picked up black walnuts and I wrote a poem, and there was this beautiful moment when I slept with the seed of the black walnut. And of course, I researched deeply. And then when I finished the project and went to see my mother, we had a conversation, and suddenly I remembered that actually there is a specific medicine of black walnut that I took maybe 15 years before, because black walnut has this power to expel things from the body and also from energetic field. So somehow this medicine came to my mom, and she shared it with me, and I took it for specific reasons. So these things sometimes we forget. So the plant, the seed, it can come to us, and it's there, it's imprinted. And then it will come out if we allow this to happen after a cycle. So this is just one example that I'm sharing with you, that I believe this is a seed that came to me through the medicine that then came back to ask for this type of work that I needed to do.
Well, your work, Evgenia, your work is really extraordinary, because I mean, you're not only interweaving sound, really listening to the forest, art, your own presence there, but you're able to like have a vision for the future and know which pathways to take in order to help realize that. I mean, it's really quite an extraordinary bundle of gifts in one person. So, and it's work that's just so important on so many levels. So it's very inspiring.
Thank you so much.
I think with that, it's maybe a good time to close the conversation, unless there's something, Evgenia, that you would like to say just before we close.
Well, I would like to ask you maybe briefly to share what insights did you have from this conversation? Like what kind of sparked, what sparked that came to you today?
Trevi, do you want to comment?
Well, I think I said it when I just spoke a moment ago, is that I'm just inspired by how many filaments of nature and humanity and organizational know-how that you have brought together
Thank you.
on behalf of the present and the future.
I think there's something in that for me too, just how I honor your insight and your vision, and that the 1,000 years is such an important time frame, and for you to be doing this work is a great honor, and it's just wonderful to know you and to know that you're inspired to do what you're doing. And I highly recommend that anybody gets a chance to buy your book and have a look further at what you do.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for hosting this conversation. I hope that we get a chance to actually work together someday as well.
I hope so too, definitely. So we will be, this has been going on Facebook Live, and it will remain on our Radical Joy for Hard Times Facebook page. We'll also be putting it on YouTube, and I send you the link for that tomorrow, Evgenia. And we invite all our Earth Exchange Cafe regulars to join us on December 14th. We're going to be talking to Meredith Little Foster, who with her husband, Stephen Foster, created wilderness rites of passage for non-Indigenous people, for all people, almost 50 years ago. So, and her work has continued in new and different pathways since Stephen died about 15 years ago. So please join us for that. And as we conclude our conversation for today, we've enjoyed our tea and coffee and chocolate, and the music of this conversation with this inspiring artist and thinker and activist, Evgenia Emets. And we now get ready to leave the cafe, to scoot our chairs under the table and say goodbye and walk out the door to rejoin again in a month. And Harriet, thank you for coming up with this wonderful idea of this program and this particular guest.
And thanks to Evgenia again for coming to chat with us for an hour and been so inspiring. And thank you for sharing all of your amazing projects and your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this invitation.